Dawn broke over the Atlantic Ocean near the Spanish coast of Huelva on a cool April morning in 1943. A solitary sardine fisherman spotted a dark shape bobbing rhythmically in the gentle swells of the sea. As he maneuvered his small wooden boat closer to the object, he realized with a jolt of horror that it was a human body floating face down in the water. The corpse was dressed in a military trench coat and a life jacket that seemed to have failed in its duty to save the man. Secured tightly to the wrist of the dead man was a black leather briefcase that trailed in the water like a dark anchor. This grim discovery was not merely a tragedy of war, but the opening move in one of the most audacious intelligence operations in history. The fisherman hauled the waterlogged body aboard his vessel and immediately set a course for the shore. He handed the corpse over to the local Spanish authorities, who were officially neutral, but known to be swarming with German spies and sympathizers. The discovery of a British officer carrying a locked briefcase sent ripples of excitement through the local intelligence community. The identity documents found in his pockets named him as Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. However, unbeknownst to the Spanish officials and the German agents watching from the shadows, Major Martin had never commanded a platoon nor fired a weapon in anger. In fact, Major William Martin had never even been alive. By the spring of 1943, the Second World War had reached a critical turning point. The Allied forces had successfully driven the Axis powers out of North Africa and were now looking across the Mediterranean Sea toward the continent of Europe. The British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had agreed at the Casablanca Conference that their next major offensive would be an invasion of Italy. This strategy was designed to knock Italy out of the war and force Germany to divert troops from the Eastern Front, where the Soviet Union was engaged in a brutal struggle for survival. The strategic problem facing the Allied planners was one of geography and obviousness. The island of Sicily lay like a stepping stone between North Africa and the Italian mainland, making it the most logical target for an amphibious invasion. It was so obvious that Winston Churchill himself remarked that anyone but a fool would know it was Sicily. The German High Command and Adolf Hitler were certainly not fools, and they fully expected the attack to come there. If the Germans reinforced Sicily with their panzer divisions, the Allied invasion would likely turn into a bloodbath, resulting in thousands of casualties and potential failure. To prevent a massacre, the British intelligence services needed to convince the Germans that the obvious target was actually a feint. They needed to make the enemy believe that the Allies intended to strike elsewhere, specifically in Greece and Sardinia. This task fell to the 20 Committee, a group of intelligence officers and double agents dedicated to counter-espionage and deception. Among the brilliant minds in this group were Ewan Montagu, a naval intelligence officer with a sharp legal mind, and Charles Comendelli, a flight lieutenant in the Royal Air Force with a flair for eccentric ideas. Charles Comendelli had originally proposed a plan involving a dead body attached to a parachute that would be dropped over enemy territory with a radio set. However, the plan was deemed impractical and shelved until the need for a massive deception regarding Sicily arose. Ewan Montagu and Charles Comendelli revisited the concept and refined it into something far more subtle and believable. They decided to plant a body in the sea off the coast of Spain, making it look like the victim of a plane crash at sea. The body would carry top-secret documents revealing the false invasion plans, ensuring they fell into German hands. The first and most macabre hurdle was finding a suitable body. They needed a corpse that looked as though it had died at sea, specifically from drowning or hypothermia, and had no visible injuries that would betray a different cause of death. Ewan Montagu and Charles Comendelli searched the morgues of London in secret. They eventually found the body of Glyndwr Michael, a homeless man from Wales who had died from ingesting rat poison. The poison had caused fluid to build up in his lungs, which a pathologist confirmed would look very similar to the effects of drowning after being in the water for several days. Using the body of Glyndwr Michael raised significant ethical and legal questions. The two intelligence officers had to navigate a complex bureaucracy to secure custody of the corpse without revealing their true purpose to anyone outside the inner circle. They promised that the man would be buried with full military honors, even if under a false name. They viewed this deception not as a desecration, but as a chance for a man who had lived a tragic and unnoticed life to perform a heroic service for his country in death. With the body secured, they placed it in cold storage and began the work of building a new identity. They created the persona of Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. They chose the Royal Marines because the battle dress was easily obtained, and the rank of major was senior enough to carry important documents, but not so high as to be recognized by everyone. Ewan Montagu and his team spent weeks crafting a detailed backstory for this fictional man. They decided he was born in Cardiff in 1907, giving him a Welsh connection that matched the physical appearance of Glyndwr Michael. They determined his religion as Roman Catholic and even gave him a temporary identification card to replace the standard naval pass. To make Major Martin believable to any German intelligence officer who might investigate him, the team created what they called pocket litter. These were the everyday items a man would carry in his pockets that told the story of his life. They included a book of stamps, a pack of cigarettes, matches, a silver cross on a chain, and a set of keys. They wanted to show that he was a real person with flaws and habits. They even included a receipt for a new shirt and a stiff letter from Lloyd's Bank demanding payment for an overdraft of £79, providing a reason for him to be anxious. The most poignant touch in the creation of Major Martin was the invention of a fiancée named Pam. The team wanted to show that he was a man in love who was looking forward to a future that would never come. A female staff member at the intelligence office provided a photograph of herself posing in a bathing suit to serve as the picture of Pam. Ewan Montagu wrote passionate love letters from Pam to Martin, filling them with mundane details about wartime life and wedding preparations. They even purchased a diamond engagement ring and included the receipt in the pocket of the trench coat. The centerpiece of the deception was the official correspondence that Major Martin would be carrying. The documents had to be high-level enough to change German strategy, but written in a way that felt natural and informal. The main document was a personal letter from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald, nigh the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, who was commanding the army in North Africa. In the letter, Nye discussed the upcoming Allied operations, casually mentioning that they would be targeting Greece and Sardinia while using Sicily as a cover plan. Writing this letter was an exercise in psychological warfare. It had to sound like one general writing to another off the record. Ewan Montagu and his team drafted and redrafted the text to ensure the tone was perfect. They included specific details about troop movements and command appointments to add credibility. The letter explicitly stated that the target was Greece and that the assault on Sicily was merely a deception to fool the Germans. This double bluff was designed to make the Germans feel clever for discovering the secret truth hidden in the briefcase. A second letter was included to reinforce the deception. This one was from Lord Louis Mountbatten, the Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, the Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. The letter introduced Major Martin as an expert in amphibious warfare who was traveling to North Africa to assist with the preparations. It included a joke about sardines, which was a subtle reference to the false target of Sardinia. This letter served to explain why a Royal Marine officer was flying to North Africa and why he was carrying such sensitive documents. Once the documents were prepared and the pocket litter was planted, the team had to dress the stiff, frozen body of Glyndwr Michael. This proved to be a difficult physical task, requiring them to thaw the feet of the corpse just enough to force on the military boots. They dressed him in thermal underwear, a shirt, a tie, and the battle dress of a Royal Marine Major. Finally, they put on the trench coat and the Me West life jacket. The briefcase containing the documents was attached to his wrist by a chain, a practice used by couriers to prevent loss. The transportation of the body from London to the launch point required absolute secrecy. Ewan Montagu and Charles Comendeli designed a special canister to hold the body. It was a double-walled steel container packed with dry ice to keep the corpse preserved during the journey. The canister weighed over 400 pounds and looked like a piece of industrial equipment. They labeled it as optical instruments to discourage curiosity from anyone who might see it being loaded. A driver was assigned to take the canister, and the two officers all the way to Scotland. The drive north to the naval base at Holy Loch in Scotland was a tense affair. The two officers worried constantly about the temperature inside the canister and whether the dry ice would last long enough to prevent decomposition. They drove through the night racing against time and the natural processes of death. Upon arrival at the docks, they met the crew of the submarine that would carry Major Martin on his final mission. The vessel was His Majesty's ship Seraph, commanded by Lieutenant Bill Jewell, a young and capable officer who had been briefed on the importance of the mission. Only Lieutenant Bill Jewell and his officers knew the true nature of the cargo they were taking aboard. The rest of the crew was told that the canister contained a top-secret meteorological device. The canister was carefully lowered through the torpedo loading hatch of the submarine. It was a tight fit, and the heavy steel cylinder scraped against the metal of the hull as it was maneuvered into place. Once secured, the Seraph slipped away from the dock and submerged into the cold waters of the Atlantic, setting a course for the coast of Spain. The journey to the Spanish coast took 10 days. Inside the submarine, the atmosphere was cramped and tense. The crew went about their duties unaware that they were sharing their vessel with a dead man who held the fate of the invasion of Sicily in his frozen hands. Lieutenant Bill Jewell monitored the progress closely, checking his charts and awaiting the signal to proceed. The plan called for the body to be released close to the shore near Hulva, where the tides would carry it onto the beach. Hulva was chosen specifically because of the presence of a very active and effective German vice-consul named Adolf Hitler. Claus was known to be a resourceful spy with excellent contacts in the Spanish civil guard and local government. British intelligence was banking on Claus hearing about the body and using his influence to get access to the documents. If the body had washed up in a place with no German presence, the documents might have been returned to the British unopened, and the entire operation would have been a failure. On the morning of April 30, 1943, the Seraph reached its destination. Lieutenant Bill Jewell brought the submarine up to periscope depth to check the coastline. Satisfied that no other ships were nearby, he ordered the submarine to surface. It was 4 a.m. and the sea was calm. The officers hauled the heavy canister up to the deck. They opened the lid and carefully lifted the body of Major Martin out. Lieutenant Jewell read the 39th Psalm as a brief funeral service for the unknown man. One officer inflated the life jacket, while another checked that the briefcase was still securely chained to the wrist. They gently lowered the body into the water, letting the current take hold of it. To simulate a plane crash, they also pushed a rubber dinghy into the water nearby. The submarine then submerged and headed back out to sea, leaving Major Martin alone in the darkness. The first phase of the operation was complete. Now they had to wait and see if the bait would be taken. When the body was discovered by the fishermen later that morning, the machinery of the deception began to turn. The Spanish authorities took possession of the body and the briefcase. The British naval attaché in Madrid was informed, and he immediately began a calculated performance of anxiety. He made urgent inquiries about the body and specifically asked about the briefcase, demanding its return. He acted as though the briefcase contained matters of the utmost secrecy that must not be seen by unauthorized eyes. This panic was designed to convince the Spanish and the Germans that the documents were genuine. The Spanish doctors performed an autopsy on the body in Hulva. The British had been terrified that a thorough post-mortem examination would reveal that the man had died from rat poison and not drowning. However, the Spanish doctors were hurried, and the advanced state of decomposition made their job difficult. They concluded that the man was indeed a victim of drowning at sea. They noted the fluid in the lungs and the lack of external violence. The deception had passed its first major medical test. Meanwhile, the German spy Adolf Hitler was working frantically to get access to the briefcase. He pressured the Spanish military governor and used every ounce of his influence to prevent the documents from being returned to the British immediately. The Spanish government was caught in a diplomatic tug of war. They wanted to maintain their neutrality, but they also feared the power of Germany. Eventually, the pressure from Claus and his superiors in Berlin became too great to ignore. While the briefcase remained in Spanish custody, specialized technicians working for the German intelligence service were granted secret access to it. They carefully removed the documents without breaking the official seals. They used a technique involving rolling the letters around a thin split probe to extract them from the envelopes without tearing the paper. They photographed every page of the letters from General Nye and Lord Mountbatten. They also photographed the personal letters from Pam and the other pocket litter items. Once the photographs were taken, the Germans carefully replaced the documents and resealed the envelopes. They were meticulous in their work, trying to leave no trace of their tampering. However, the British had anticipated this. They had placed a single eyelash inside one of the letters as a tiny security seal. If the letter was removed and read, the eyelash would fall out and be lost. When the briefcase was finally returned to London, forensic experts checked for the eyelash. It was missing, confirming that the letters had been read. The photographs of the documents were rushed to Berlin, where they were analyzed by the highest levels of German intelligence. The analysts looked for inconsistencies and flaws but found none. The backstory of Major Martin held up under scrutiny. The casual tone of the letters between the generals seemed authentic. The personal details of the engagement ring and the overdraft added a layer of truth that was hard to fabricate. The German intelligence chiefs became convinced that they had stumbled upon a goldmine of strategic information. The intelligence summary eventually reached the desk of Adolf Hitler. The German leader had always been suspicious of an attack on the Balkans, and this information confirmed his own intuition. He believed the documents completely. He declared that the discovery of the Anglo-American invasion plans was a gift from Providence. On May 12, 1943, Hitler issued a directive ordering the reinforcement of Greece and Sardinia at the expense of Sicily. The deception known as Operation Mincemeat had been swallowed whole. The consequences of Hitler's decision were massive and immediate. An entire panzer division was transferred from France to Greece. 2 more panzer divisions were moved from the Eastern Front to the Balkans, weakening the German line against the Soviets just before the critical Battle of Kursk. Rommel himself was sent to Athens to command the expected defense. In Sardinia, the Germans strengthened their fortifications and laid minefields. Meanwhile, the defenses of Sicily were left relatively neglected compared to the massive buildup happening elsewhere. On July 9, 1943, the Allied invasion fleet launched Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. It was a massive amphibious assault involving thousands of ships and aircraft. As the British and American troops stormed the beaches, they expected to face a wall of steel and fire. Instead, they found that the coastal defenses were thinner than anticipated. The heavy German armor that should have been waiting for them was hundreds of miles away in Greece, guarding against an attack that would never come. The German high command remained confused even after the landings in Sicily had begun. They were so convinced by the mincemeat documents that they believed the Sicily landing was the diversion and the main attack on Greece was still imminent. This hesitation prevented them from rushing reinforcements to Sicily in the critical early hours of the invasion. By the time they realized their mistake, the Allies had established a firm beachhead and were pushing inland. The window of opportunity to throw the invaders back into the sea had closed. The conquest of Sicily took 38 days. While the fighting was still fierce and casualties were sustained, the operation was a decisive strategic victory. The Allies suffered far fewer losses than they had calculated for a direct assault on a prepared enemy. The fall of Sicily led directly to the downfall of Benito Mussolini and the eventual surrender of Italy. The soft underbelly of Europe had been pierced, and the road to Berlin was now open from the south. Back in London, Ewan Montagu and his team celebrated their success quietly. They received a simple message from the code breakers who were monitoring German communications. The message read, "Mincemeat swallowed rod, line, and sinker." It was the confirmation that their bizarre and macabre plan had worked beyond their wildest dreams. They had used a dead man to fool a dictator, and in doing so they had saved thousands of Allied lives. The body of Major William Martin was buried in the cemetery of Hulva with full military honors. The Spanish provided a respectful service, and the British vice-consul attended to pay his respects. For decades, the grave was tended by the daughter of a local worker who believed she was caring for a fallen hero. The headstone bore the name William Martin and the inscription Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which translates to "it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." It was not until 1998 that the British government officially revealed the true identity of the man in the grave. The inscription on the headstone was amended to include the name Glyndwr Michael. The homeless man who had died alone and unnoticed in a London warehouse had finally been recognized for his contribution to the victory against fascism. He had never been a soldier in life, but in death he had achieved more than entire divisions of troops. Operation Mincemeat remains one of the most successful examples of espionage and deception in the history of warfare. It demonstrated the power of creativity and psychological insight in military planning. It showed that wars are won not just by the force of arms, but by the cunning of the mind. The story of the man who never was continues to fascinate historians and the public, serving as a reminder of the strange and hidden layers of conflict. Today, the grave in Hulva stands as a unique monument to the unknown soldiers of the secret war. It honors both the fictional Major Martin and the real Glyndwr Michael. Visitors leave flowers and notes acknowledging the strange destiny that linked a Welsh drifter to the grand strategy of World War II. In the silence of the cemetery, one can almost hear the whisper of history telling the tale of how a dead man deceived Hitler and helped to liberate Europe.